Okay, so today we're going to talk a little bit about self-esteem, knowing ourselves, and as part of it, this idea of positive self-talk. We've maybe covered it a little bit in conversations, but I want to make sure that we are really addressing it because it's a very important part of building self-esteem, continuing to grow yourself, and recognizing your strengths. Okay, so let's see if this works. We're all we all remember this movie, The Wizard of Oz. This is sort of where Dorothy Gale lands in this fantasy land and she takes off on a journey to find her way home. So, I don't know, this video is loaded up. Here we go.
My, people come and go so quickly here. Follow the yellow brick road. Follow the yellow brick road.
Follow the yellow brick road. Follow the yellow brick road. Follow the yellow brick road. Follow the yellow brick road.
Yeah.
Okay, so as we can see, there is, there's Dorothy Gale, as I said before, and she's instructed to follow the yellow brick road. So I think the question we have to ask ourselves is there a yellow brick road? Does this exist for us? Is there something that's going to guide us to this idea of self-discovery or figuring out where we want to go and what's the best way to get there? So, we have to look at how we discover ourselves, how we challenge ourselves, and how we will stretch ourselves. When we're very young and in school, we're constantly asked to do things that maybe aren't our strengths or that we haven't thought about, like singing in choir or playing in the band or climbing a rope in gym class, learning a language. These are all things that maybe some of us have a gift, some of us have strengths in, and some maybe this is a weakness. So we have to, as young people, decide what are our strengths and use those strengths to overcome these obstacles that are put in our place. I think the older we get, the less we're challenged. The more we become in charge of our lives, the less we are likely to challenge ourselves because we fall into the comfort zone. We fall into doing things that make us feel comfortable and safe and that we can be successful. And while that's important and good to feel comfortable, it doesn't help us continue to grow and it doesn't help us continue to challenge ourselves and discover ourselves. So, as we look at exploring our strengths as adults, how can we do it in a way that's safe, that helps build our self esteem, and helps make sure that we're using those strengths in good ways? So, in this movie, in The Wizard of Oz, if you remember, strengths can be used for good or strengths can be used in ways that are morally questionable. So, who did this in The Wizard of Oz? Who used their strengths in ways that were morally questionable? If you recall the wizard plays the fellow plays the wizard in many has many roles in this. He's the magician in the beginning. He's at the gate. He plays the actual wizard. But this wizard is quite frightened, right? He uses power. I would say it's maybe not even a strength. He uses power in a way that's questionable. He sort of hides behind a curtain and uses this sort of bluster and theatrics to trick people into thinking that he's very powerful, when in reality, he's quite meek. But he's not unintelligent. He does have good advice for the four travelers in this movie: the Dorothy, the lion, the Scarecrow and the Tin Man. He does give them good advice in the end, and also in some ways gives himself some advice as to what he needs to do for the next step for himself. The witch, she's also a questionable character in the movie, of course, and she uses her magical powers and this strength not for good, in a way to try to thwart Dorothy's efforts at her own self-discovery. Okay, so people carry their strengths with them, but not necessarily in the right situation to use them. So one of the ways that we look at this movie is to look at it from this strength-based perspective, right? What are the things that each of our characters are looking for? This is kind of the end of the movie first. But if we look at the beginning, we look at Dorothy, who's lost. We look at the Scarecrow, who has no brain. He's sort of powerless. He's a little bit out of control. He can't find direction. The Tin Man, he has no heart. He has no gumption. We look at the lion, and he's apparently cowardly, which is the opposite of what you'd expect from a lion. So these characters are all looking at themselves in a way that is not the lens of strength. They're looking at themselves in a way with the lens of weakness. What are the things that are weak about them? And they're missing their strength. And to touch on this idea of positive self-talk, this is often what we do as people. We look at our weaknesses, we beat ourselves up for the things that we're doing wrong, and we don't celebrate what we're doing right. And as we talked about earlier, and as we'll continue to talk about in this class, is how can we change that mindset, reprogram our brains in a way to look at ourselves from a strength base. Now, this isn't in an effort to become a narcissist. This isn't in an effort to uh, ignore our weaknesses, because certainly it's also important to recognize the things that we can be better at. But I believe that our brains and our evolution over time has created a scenario where, in order to protect ourselves, we look for the gaps, we look for the danger, we look for the weaknesses, and we focus on this. And we constantly remind ourselves of these things. And rather than keeping ourselves, focused on our goals, but from a strength-based lens, when we looked at the photo of the family, we had to look for the strengths, right? And it wasn't easy always. We had to kind of really, really search for them because the weaknesses were much more apparent uh, because that's how our brains work. But if we look at this idea of strengths, I think we would have a much shorter movie, right, in The Wizard of Oz. They would have realized their strengths much earlier on. Okay, so Scarecrow is on the pole. He has this pole sort of stopping him from doing what he wants. He gets down off the pole, but he still doesn't have this idea of self-determination, right? He still doesn't have this idea that he knows where to go, he knows how to do it, and he has a lack of confidence. He says, he's only full of stuffing, he has no brain. He's helped by Dorothy off the pole, so she gives him that first step, literally, and they go off to see the wizard. And this idea is that the wizard is going to solve their problems, that the answer comes from outside. And this is where we really, um, can take a lesson from the movie, is the answer to many of our questions and many of our troubles is inside of us. And I think if we can rethink things and reprogram ourselves to think that way, we can have a different experience. So that's kind of the Scarecrow situation. The Ruby Slippers, this was the answer to Dorothy's problems, the Ruby Slippers. She merely needed to click the heels together and say she wanted to go home, and she would have solved her problems. But was that the answer to her problem? What was Dorothy really looking for in uh, in this story? Is she looking for home? Is she looking to get back to Kansas, or is she looking for herself? And I think that's the question. That what really teaches her in the story is the adversity. And approaching the adversity from a strength perspective is what gets her where she needs to go in the end. So she had all along this power with her, but she wasn't applying it properly. So until she applied that properly, she wasn't able to achieve. We have to recognize our strengths, and we have to use those strengths to move us forward toward our goals, And in being realistic about it, make sure that we are making those right steps along the way. So mirroring back strengths to people is a great way to reinforce them, right? This is what is done in this movie time and time again. Dorothy does it for her friends, they do it for her, and in the end, the wizard does it for all of them. He really shows them that, hey, you're not unintelligent. You figured this out. You knew this. You're not lacking heart. You cared about all of these people. You helped save them. And for the lion, you're not lacking courage. You are uh, have the courage and you were very brave in this instance and this instance, and reflected that back to them, and then they were able to see it. And for Dorothy, he did the same, where he kind of showed them that home is inside of you. It's not a place, it's a sense of being. And I think for Dorothy, we all have aspects of each of these characters within us, but for the Dorothy in us, what we have to think about is the the secret to happiness is being happy, right? That's how you get there. But I think if you are grateful, if you practice gratefulness, if you practice mindfulness, if you are grateful for the things that are happening, even those small things, then all of a sudden you're happy. So it's about recognizing in your life every day those things that you're grateful for. Your kids, you're sitting in the morning and having a cup of coffee and the sun is shining on you, the rain for your garden, even things that maybe seem like a downer, you can be grateful for them if you look at them as something that's going to get you someplace. So when I look back at my life, I could focus on the hardships and this and the sad things that have happened, or I could look at all of those things as things that got me to where I am today, and I'm grateful for today, and therefore I'm happy. So in terms of Dorothy, this is kind of a good lesson that we can learn, from her. This idea of strength is observing people in action, practicing observing others and finding the strengths in them, and then applying that back to yourself. Observe yourself in action, review those good things, celebrate those things. And it sounds very, very silly, but giving yourself that positive feedback, giving yourself a hand in a sense, not in an embarrassing or disruptive way, but in your mind, saying, great job, good work with that, even in the smallest ways, you did a good job parallel parking, and then taking 2 seconds to say, you know what, good job, you did it. And sometimes in larger ways where you didn't say that thing that was going to escalate the argument, or you achieved something on your to-do list. These are all things that you can celebrate, but I would also urge you to set up situations for celebration, like making a to-do list and then celebrating them as you check off those things on that list. Okay, so when we look at Dorothy, we talked about this a little already. She exemplifies bravery, persistence, fairness, hope, and especially love. So these are all of the things that these other characters are allegedly lacking also, or reflected in Dorothy. And remember, the idea of The Wizard of Oz is, and I hope this isn't a spoiler if you haven't seen it, but this is Dorothy's dream, right? This is in Dorothy's mind. She's courageous in her defense of Toto. She defies the wizard in defense of the lion, and defying the witch to defend the scarecrow. She persists even after the disappointment of facing the wizard. She learns that love is central to her life. She chooses the grayness of Kansas, over the color of Oz. She practices the strength of reciprocal love. This is a very important lesson for Dorothy. And it's kind of like you get what you give, this kind of idea. Scarecrow initially is hanging on a pole. Scarecrow's living in a life totally unsuited to his strengths. He can't scare the crows away at all. He's very bad at his job in a sense. Dorothy removing him from the pole gives him the chance to discover his strengths, his open-mindedness, his perspective, his curiosity, his leadership, and his kindness. He claims he can't make up his mind, but he can tell Dorothy how to get him down, right? So he tells her exactly what he needed to know, but he just needed that extra little hand. He doesn't suffer from hunger, but he understands that Dorothy does, right? He has this idea of empathy. He doesn't eat, but he points this out, for Dorothy. He says, "I'll help you get to the wizard, whether I get my brain or not." This idea of selflessness, right? So the Tin Man, and I played the Tin Man when I was a child. Maybe I was 10 years old. I played the Tin Man. school production of The Wizard of Oz. The strengths of the Tin Man are not well presented in the movie, they're not as well presented in the movie as in the book. But he does have integrity, kindness, fairness, and citizenship. He thinks he has no heart, but he's actually encumbered by his great emotion. He's blind to it, so he can't use it properly. He's always crying, and his tears rust him, right? So he freezes because of this emotion. And I think we often can find ourselves, if we've been uh, in situations where we felt damaged emotionally, or we felt like our emotions haven't been heard, we can shy away from that. And so we can try to shut off our emotions because we feel like it's going to freeze us. It's going to stop us from achieving what we want. So the Tin Man is a good lesson for all of us. And in the end, he learns to use his emotion for good, and to help himself and to help his friends. The lion, of course, this seems like the most obvious one, but he's his own worst enemy. His strength of humility conflict with his idea about who he thinks he should be. His own definition of courage masks his actual courage. His true bravery only comes out when he has nothing to gain, when he's protecting others. He has a lot of bluster, right? He's always, saying how brave he is, but then he's really a scaredy cat in lots of ways in what we see in the movie. He must learn his own self-worth to learn how to use his bravery to help himself and ultimately others. Um, and then, of course, we have the wizard. The wizard is a blend of good and bad, back in canvas. He's the traveling magician, a charlatan. He uses his powers of observation to trick others into thinking he's telling their fortune. As you remember, he sort of like takes some of the clues that Dorothy's giving him to make her think that he's a genuine fortune teller. In Dorothy's case, he puts his observations together with his social intelligence and kindness. Then he tries to make Dorothy understand how Auntie Em would feel if she ran away. When he hands the characters their diploma, heart, etc., he mirrors back their strengths to them, which is very selfless. So, what the characters, or we can learn. Dorothy learns her heart's desire is in her backyard all along. It's part of her. She creates this sense of home. She creates this sense of happiness. It's within her the whole time. The wizard learns that through generosity, he can be free, right? He crashed in Oz. He didn't want to be there. He crashed from his balloon. And he ends up being free because he's helping others. So he gains this freedom by not focusing on himself, by not trying to pretend to be something, but by focusing on the needs of the other characters. Scarecrow and the Tin Man realize that with the small changes, they can realize their dreams. They shift their mindset to understand that if they look at their strengths and they use those strengths, not only can they help others, but they can ultimately help themselves. And the lion, again, uses his strength to save himself and then save others. So, one of the things that I think we can look at when we think about, this movie, this movie is 1939, so this is a long time ago, and the books are even older than that, is that we need to sometimes take a step back from ourselves. Sometimes we get so mired in being us, being in us, and all the feelings that happen with that we're not able to really have a good perspective on us. And often as adults, we don't have somebody watching over us, and giving us reflective feedback like our parents or teachers. We often find ourselves isolated from that kind of reflective process. So we can only rely on our own reflections. And very often we don't look at ourselves in the most objective way. So, in one, looking at others and practicing this idea of finding strengths in others, we can then use that to find strengths in ourselves. And in reprogramming our brains to look at the positive, to reflect on positive self talk and practice it each day, we can reset sort of that clock to try to understand who we are a little bit better. Okay, so thank you, and I will send you another video in the next.